Well, good morning, everybody. Today is the 15th of December, and we've got kind of a show for those of you who are in the mood for blood and revenge. Uh, so I guess we might as well just dive right into it. Today's episode is called Know Your Enemy. During the World War II, certainly, and really during every war in history, there's been some version of Know Your Enemy. And there were all these, you may have seen some of these movies that were done for the American soldiers in World War II. And Know Your Enemy doesn't just mean, I mean, if you were to lecture the Marines on Know Your Enemy in 1942, and you had everybody lined up out there, and you were to come to the front, and you have your intelligence officer step up, and he gives you the briefing, and he says, "Gentlemen, our enemy is the Japanese." And then he goes back and sits down. Well, thanks for the helpful tip. Know your enemy doesn't mean just identifying the enemy. We all know who the enemies of freedom are in America today. The trick to it is understanding their motives and their operational methods and their weaknesses and their strength. That's what know your enemy really means. So to start off, let me just come clean with something here. The social proof, the constant brainwashing, the constant drumming into your head on a daily basis is so pervasive that no one is immune to it. Certainly not me. Maybe I'm more susceptible to many people. When I was thinking about this show title, I thought, no, I don't want to really say enemy. That's a little strong. I don't want to be like quite so nasty, and I sure don't want to be accused of hate speech and all. And I just realized it's like they're so deep in our subconsciouses by now that it's even as simple thing as that is something that you have to fight. But that's exactly what they are. These aren't political opponents, and when I say enemies, I don't mean enemies of even conservative values, although I think, like I said, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, those terms are essentially obsolete. I think it really has proven to be now really it's a question of Americans versus anti-Americans, but there are enemies of American values. And one of the things that these enemies of American values will do is they will tell you right off the bat that there's no such thing as American values. They'll say that, no, that whole idea is just, racist and un-American, to say that there is such a thing as un-American enemies and un-American, anti-American values, but there certainly are. And we all know what those values are, but that's for a different show. So why don't we go down a list of the people that have proven themselves time and time and time again to be enemies of America, of the American ideal, of the ideal of governance of the people, of being left alone, private property, freedom of speech, all those things. So I made a little list, not of names, of individual names, because I find that repugnant and abhorrent. We're really fighting a philosophy here. There's people who need to go to jail for individual criminal offenses, but the idea of criminalizing your political opponents is one of the things that we're fighting against. But I do have a list of occupations, and before I get into this little list of who I think our primary enemies of Americanism and freedom are, let me start by telling you who our enemies are not. And I know that everybody's rage and frustration levels are very, very high right now, and I feel it too. So if you have an inclination to turn off the video at this point, I would just simply ask you to stay with me for 2 minutes, because I think it'll be clear what I mean by this. By and large, the enemies of America are not the rank and file Democrats that voted for Joe Biden. And let me tell you why I say this. I have a friend from my college days named Matt. And we get together and watch Gator football together, although I haven't done it in a couple of years. But Matt puts out a newsletter about Gator football. And he said, oh, it's just such a great thing this year. The Gators are doing pretty well. And he said, in the face of such incredible threats to our democracy and a divisive election and so on, it's something that's kept me happy and cheerful. And my inclination, or not just my inclination, out loud, I said, Matt, you can't be this stupid. The threat to democracy is not Donald Trump suing or other people suing to have these election results verified. The threat to democracy is the voter fraud. I basically said that out loud. And then, since I know this guy well, and I know he loves this country, and then I did something that I think we all need to do, because when you get right down to it, this is not excusing anything. It's actually very good news. What I realized was, how could he possibly know any different? How could he possibly know different? I certainly, when I was young and a lot more liberal than I am now, although certainly those terms didn't mean anything like what they mean today, I was passionately certain about things I knew absolutely nothing about. Nothing. And I was at a solid, passionate opinion on all of them. But just stay with me for a minute here, because I know a lot of us are just furious in the idea that somebody could vote for Biden or Harris or whatever. Just hang on for a second, because as I say, this is ultimately good news. How could they know if all they've ever been told on the news and everywhere else, not only all of the things they'd heard bad about Donald Trump and all of the things that they never heard about Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton, but also whatever they may have heard peripherally has been immediately and from multiple sources encapsulated, like in a cyst. Oh, that's Fox News. That's not true. That's been thoroughly debunked. The reason that we know what we know, the reason that we dig into the news, the reason that we have to go searching for things against the Google search algorithms, against the mainstream media, including Fox News now, including the Drudge Report now, we continue to burrow down and try and find out what the actual truth is. But the reason we do that is because the narrative that's being pushed out is different than our own values. We see a conflict between the things that we believe in our lives versus the things that the mainstream media and celebrities in Hollywood and all the rest of them are telling us. We see a conflict between the values they tell us that we're supposed to accept and the values that we believe. And that conflict, in some of us anyway, makes us want to swim upstream, because we know on some level that these things are just plain wrong. But if that didn't happen, if you had been raised in this kind of an educational system, or if nothing in the mainstream media narrative was personally found to be offensive to you because it had not contradicted with your direct experience, how would you know? How would you know? So I'm not saying all of them need to get let off the hook. There are certainly people, and we'll get down the list, but there are certainly some individuals that are fully aware of the media covering up these stories, and fully aware of Hillary Clinton's felonies, and fully aware of all, and they vote Democrat anyway. Those people are in a different category. But I think we really have to put these labels aside and understand that while so many of us are patriotic Americans, they've been told that patriotic Americanism is the narrative, and they have not been able to dig into the protective armor around the truth that these murderous swine have spun, and so we've got to understand that it's not the patriotic Americans who think they're doing the right thing by voting for Democrats that are the enemy. It's the people that have kept information from them, lied to them, constantly told them things that they knew to be true, suppressed news stories like the Hunter Biden laptop thing, and it's all about things like the FBI director coming out and saying no one should know, there's no reason to prosecute Hillary Clinton. If you didn't know all of this stuff, how could you possibly know that this whole thing was a web of lies? You couldn't. And if you were told that the only people that believe these things are a bunch of lunatics who are embedded in conspiracy theories, how unreasonable would that sound? So we need to get past the anger at that, and I feel a great deal of it too. There's nothing like sitting here in California, watching businesses close down, watching that woman talking about saving her restaurant and how enraged she was that her outdoor patio that she had just spent tens of thousands of dollars to build had been shut down by Gavin Newsom, when across the alleyway, I mean, honest to God, 30 feet away is an identical pavilion for a movie crew. And that's wide open for business. And she's tears in her eyes with frustration. And I watch this and I say, I'm so sympathetic to you, but it makes me wonder, how did that person vote? You know, it's so frustrating to watch people continue to vote for this and not kind of wake up out of it, but it's not their fault. In almost, I'd say 8 out of 10 cases, not their fault. They just don't know any better. They think that they've only heard one side of the story, and when you've only heard one side of the story, that's what you believe. I believed for about a week that the 16th Earl of Oxford was the guy who wrote Shakespeare's plays, because I only heard that side of the story. I heard all of the evidence saying that Shakespeare wasn't really Shakespeare, and that they were all written by the guy whose name eludes me now, but it'll come back to me, Edward de Vere. And all these great pieces of evidence saying, no, it wasn't Shakespeare, it's actually this guy. And I was on board for about a week. And then I did the responsible thing, and I looked into the case for Shakespeare. And once I read the case for Shakespeare, then the De Vere thing just falls apart. But if you only hear one side of the story, that's how conspiracy theories work, by the way, as a general rule. When you talk about people who believe that 9/11 was an inside job or chemtrails or moon landing or whatever, you've been told one side of the story, and you've never heard the rebuttal. And so that's what you believe. So with that said, let's just kind of go down the list and identify the kind of people that are responsible for the destruction of the government of the United States, and whose inclination and motives are to continue to destroy freedom in the United States. I was referring to individual voters there. Now I'm talking about the guilty. Now I'm talking about the people who know full well what they're doing, absolutely know what they're doing. And these are the people that continue to blind everybody else through their various activities, and especially their coordination. So let's go down the list. Wow, here's a surprise. Let's start with politicians. Not all politicians, but boy, oh boy, if you had to catch one in a trap on a trail in the woods, the chances would be awfully good that you caught one who's a person who is a person singularly lacking in character. You know, it should be a little bit refreshing, because sometimes the quality of our politicians, as Glenn Reynolds at Independent says, this is the worst political class we've had in our country's history. I think he's right. But I am not aware, in all of my deep dives into history, I'm not aware of one culture in history at any time in history that ever had respect for politicians. I have not ever found one. In my opinion, and in the course of my experience in my reading and research and background, every culture that I'm aware of despises politicians. Sometimes you can have a relatively well-functioning government if the politicians are scared of the people, and we had that in this country for a while. But there's been the kind of graft and corruption and thievery that we saw on November 3rd of 2020 for virtually all of our history. I mean, the Democratic machine in Tammany Hall in New York, practically a century of just plain stealing in front of everybody's eyes and knowing it and beating people up for it. So clearly, politicians are a big part of the problem. But what is it? See, this is the part where it's no longer like, oh, we're fighting the Japanese. Any questions? Now it's like, okay, we know politicians are the problem. What is it about politicians that makes them part of the problem? How do we identify how they have power over us? What are their weaknesses, and how can we turn that against them? So it seems to me that the one thing that politicians are constructed of is ambition without character. I'm generalizing, of course. As I said, there are some clear exceptions, and we all know who they are. But they are definitely exceptions. And having watched what we've just watched in terms of the number of people that stood up and tried to defend President Trump with all these legitimate charges of fraud, and there were not a whole lot of people out there on the front line with the president. So what is it about politicians that makes them so destructive to freedom, and what is it about them that makes them so just reviled throughout all of history? Well, it seems to me, as I said, that it's ambition without character. It is easier to tax the money out of a business than it is to run a business. And if you think about it, and pick your most venal politician, the one that you really just loathe the most, you're going to find that person is essentially a nobody who could not have made it in any other way. It's somebody who's figured out that if you understand what to tell people and you spend 3 or 4 months knocking on doors, you can probably get yourself elected. And once you're on the inside, once you are an incumbent, your advantages become enormous. So I have always felt of politicians as people who wanted nice cars and power and respect and authority, but were too lazy and or too stupid to go out and earn it on their own. And rather than spending the 10 years of hard work it takes from 6 or 7 in the morning till 10 or 11 at night, 5, 6, 7 days a week, rather than going through that trouble, they've come to realize that all I have to do really is spend a relatively short period of time campaigning. And not only that, but speaking as a salesman now, as a politician thinking as a salesman, what I'm selling, if I'm like most politicians, is a pretty easy sell. I have to knock on somebody's door and I have to tell them, if you remember my name and vote for me every 2 years, I will take stuff from over there and I'll bring it over here. I'm going to take stuff from them and I'm going to give it to you, and all you have to do is remember my name, go down and vote. And once you realize that is simply the lazy and stupid way of achieving things that people who are committed to hard work achieve, then all of a sudden it gets to be kind of clear. And all of the motivations that just seem so unbelievable and unimaginable to honest, hardworking people suddenly become clear. If you're convinced that you either don't want to work hard enough or you can't, you just don't have it in you, then politics is the way to go. And how many of these corrupt politicians, and the more corrupt they are, the deeper they are into this trap, how many of them do you know that have been successful in anything else? You can count it on a handful. One of them is the President of the United States, current President of the United States. And that's why he's an exception. That's why so many people love him, or at least respect him. Donald Trump is the only president we've had in 100 years or more who took a pay cut and a power cut. Well, not a power cut, but a pay cut to be in office. So it is in the interest of politicians to get into office, but the main thing is to understand this particular enemy. You have to understand that once they have cracked that egg and they're on the inside, they will do anything to stay there. Anything. Because like anybody else, they know that you get one chance at the brass ring, and if you fail at that chance, you're not going to likely get another one in terms of your main shot. Now, most of us who run businesses know that we fail all the time. I think it's the 7th business I've opened, or maybe it's the 23rd. I can't remember. They all failed. We're doing better on this one, thanks to you. But politicians understand that once they're elected, if they get unelected, their chances of getting elected again are very, very narrow, and that's the end of the line for them. That's everything for them. All of their dreams of swimming pools and vacations in southern France and telling people what to do, and all of the things that drive these people, are over if they lose an election. And so when you ask yourself, how could somebody sell out their country? How could somebody forget selling out their country? How could somebody do something like produce really low quality paving in your neighborhood by giving it to some guy who put some money into his campaign account? How could that be possible? That's a response of an honest person who understands that rewards come with hard work and are earned by hard work, who cannot understand the fact that for the people who are emotionally predisposed to be politicians in the first place, politics it's the Willy Wonka golden ticket. It's free money, free power, free authority, free respect, all of the things that these people as a general class are missing. And so to understand why there's so much political corruption, you have to understand that if you have worked hard your entire life and you've got a business or you've got a decent house, maybe you own the title to your house, you don't have to be particularly rich. But to understand the psychology of these criminals, you have to think that if the next election comes by, let's say you own a dry cleaning store. If you want to understand how politicians think, then think that every 2 years, you're going to have to convince people in person that you've got the best dry cleaning store. And forget the market. You're going to have to convince people. And if you lose, you don't get a less of a market share. If you lose, the entire business goes away, and all of your perks go away, your income goes away, your fancy cars go away. It was the height of narcissism, arrogance, and a kind of lazy stupidity that I thought was a hallmark of the previous president. when he said that, not everybody needs a private jet, when in point of fact, President Obama had the most luxurious and elaborate private jet in the world. And he had another one exactly like it waiting behind him in case something happened to the first one. Air Force One, a converted 747, is not exactly public transportation. So so think about that. Let's just use Obama as an example. Could Barack Obama have ever done anything that wasn't in politics that would have earned him enough money to be able to fly around in a 747, spend weekends and months in vacation places, write, well, at least claim to write books that are slavishly read by people and have that kind of influence? Just think of the guy independent of the office and ask yourself if that guy could have ever achieved any of this in the private sector. I'll just drink while you're thinking. And the answer is clearly no. Joe Biden is not smart enough to run Walmart. He's not smart enough to run a Walmart. But after 47 years of shaking hands and pressing the flesh and telling people what they want to hear and kissing babies and kissing children and inappropriately groping them as well, he's managed to do pretty well for himself. So politician is a person the corrupt politician is one who is not in this for the civil service. They're in it for all of the things that you and I work hard for. They're in it for personal gain, material gain, money, power, prestige, all those things. And they do not have any kind of a character core that would cause them enough revulsion to say, I can't say that. That's just not true. It's just a lie. Our friend Scott Ott, when we were back at PJTV, ran for a county office, and Steve Green and I watched him go through that. Scott Ott's not one of those people. He won once and he didn't win the second time. One of the reasons he didn't win the second time was that he wouldn't take money that the city didn't need for things that the city didn't need, and he didn't agree with the professional politicians about, you need to get into this guy's pocket, you need to vote for this even though you don't like it, even though you think it's wrong, you need to do it because you scratch his back and he'll scratch yours. Scott wouldn't do it because Scott's an honest guy, and that's why he was not a success as a politician in this climate, but precisely why he is the kind of politician that we're going to need when we move back to America. We're going to need actual citizens to become politicians, no matter how dirty that work may be. The second enemy of freedom I would describe as a bureaucrat. They're a similar species to the politician, but unlike the politician who has to get reelected, the bureaucrat lives inside the woodwork. The bureaucrat doesn't have the benefits that the politician has. Bureaucrat doesn't have the recognition or the fame or the adulation. The bureaucrat doesn't have quite the luxury or anything. But the bureaucrat does have two things that are very appealing to the kind of person that likes the idea of becoming a bureaucrat. One of them is they've got stability. In some cultures, I think in Japan, they call this the iron rice bowl. It's the idea that I am going to get a paycheck for the rest of my life and I'm going to get my retirement and nothing's going to change that. My government's not going out of business. I want the security of knowing that everything is going to be taken care of for the rest of my life. So that's not unreasonable in some cases, but bureaucrats understand that once they get into a political system as opposed to a private system, they essentially can't be fired. And I don't know the exact number, but I've heard that here in Los Angeles, the LA Unified School District, largest teachers union in the nation, has something like, this is the number I heard, something like 6,000 teachers that we continue to pay on a daily basis. And they are not in classrooms teaching because of disciplinary problems. So they did something inappropriate or they incompetent or whatever, and rather than being fired, they simply spend their days by going into the faculty lounge and sitting there and chatting with other people who were not successful enough to make it and who should have been fired but who weren't because of the bureaucracy. And that is similar to the politicians. It's more of a elongated sort of a slow toothache rather than a sharp pain. Politician has to constantly think of, how do I get reelected so I continue to have all these benefits? Bureaucrats don't worry about that so much. They know they've got it set. But the thing about a bureaucrat is that a bureaucrat, and the real danger of bureaucrats is that very often they're people who have very serious control issues. They have to tell other people what to do. They know that in the real world they are essentially gray and faceless people, that nothing they do is memorable and needless to say, I'm generalizing, so please, throughout the whole course of this, obviously generalizing, but I think it's pretty close to it. So they're kind of faceless and nameless. That's sort of qualities you would ascribe to a bureaucrat. But since they're faceless and nameless, they take a special delight in exercising their power over you. And they may not even meet you or know you. They just like being able to do it. There's a story that I heard. I want to say it was Oregon, might have been Washington. A man on his own property put in wetlands. He basically put in a giant pond. And he did it the right way. He got some environmental consultants, put down the plastic, put in the water, put in all the reeds and all of the vegetation, all the rest of it. And sure enough, ducks started coming and landing. When it became clear to the government, the state government, again, I think it was Oregon, might have been Washington, that he had done this without a permit, they made him fill it in, and said to him, you did this without a permit, so you're going to have to fill it in. And the guy basically said, well, first of all, it's my land. They said, well, you didn't have a permit. There's the power, right? You've got a nice house. You got a beautiful house. You got enough money to put an artificial pond in your back acres there. But I am going to stop you from having the enjoyment of your house because I have a rubber stamp and I have power over you. And they said to this guy, no, you've got to fill it in. And the guy said, well, what did I do wrong? What grounds do I have to fill it in? Are you saying it's environmentally dangerous? They said, no, you did a great job. You have to fill this in. Then you have to apply for a permit. And once we grant the permit, then you can put it right back in exactly the way it was. See how that works? You will take a knee. You will take a knee to me and my rubber stamp. You will take a knee to me. It doesn't matter if you're a millionaire, doesn't matter if you're a success, doesn't matter if you're famous, beloved by all, any of that. You are going to take a knee to me because I hold the rubber stamp of legal coercion and you will bend to my will. That is the kind of personality that is absolutely opposed to any kind of freedom and any kind of individual responsibility or achievement. And you can see how these two species work together pretty well. The politician, the corrupt politician, but I repeat myself as a general rule, and the bureaucrat are symbiotes. They feed each other. The politician is the one that actually has to go out there and get the what we used to call the legitimacy of the office. And that allows them to control funds. Those funds are then actually spent by the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats then get to exercise their power, and they also get to increase their pay for themselves, and so on and so on and so on. And so now in Washington, we have a group of politicians that'll say or do anything to stay in office and say or do anything to remain in office, and they are supported by an immortal bureaucracy that never changes, that has its own particular political philosophy, and the political philosophy of the bureaucracy is that the bureaucracy must not only survive, it must grow. That's it. Any politician that comes to Washington in order to grow the government is somebody we like and support, and anybody who's trying to shrink the government and take away our jobs and power is somebody we're going to have to remove from office through our bureaucratic means. We'll drag our feet on things that they want to do, or we'll sometimes just outright do the exact opposite of what we're told to do. We will throw red tape at whatever we want to slow things down, and we will work behind the scenes to cripple any politician whose entire platform is, hey, this government's too big. You not only have to get elected as a politician to do that, and you not only have to be a politician with character to do that, but you also then have to fight your own staff, your own bureaucracy. It used to be that when U.S. Grant was elected president, for example, the entire federal bureaucracy would just leave, and he'd bring in his own people from back in Galena, Illinois, friends of his or whatever. I know a guy who runs a dry goods store. He'll make a great Treasury secretary. But as the government becomes more and more complex, we now find ourselves in a situation that we're going downhill on a truck with no brakes, and we can't stop it. We can't fire the bureaucracy because the bureaucracy has gotten so complex that if we fire the bureaucracy, then nothing works. It's a priesthood now. It's a tech priesthood, and they are a big part of our problem. Number 3 on my list of enemies of America and American ideals are journalists. There was a time when being a reporter was a noble profession, and rightfully so. Ben Franklin was a printer, and all of the entire structure of this country is predicated on a free and independent and impartial press. We haven't had that in a long time. If we had had a free press, then Hillary Clinton would be in jail. Barack Obama almost certainly would never have become president because they would have done some digging on him the way they did some digging on Sarah Palin and the other people they don't like. Everybody has bias. Everybody has their own political opinion. It used to be in this country that these things were balanced out by the fact that there would be a Democratic paper in town and a Republican paper in town. And if you ever want to get to the heart of this, as he always does, there is a brilliantly hilarious short essay by Mark Twain. I think it's called Journalism in Tennessee. It's something very similar to that. He's asked to be a newspaper editor in a small town. I think it's the funniest thing he's ever written. It gives you a good idea of the fact that all these papers were at war with each other, and one person is saying Stanton is the greatest statesman of all time, and the other paper is saying Stanton is a lying criminal. But at least then you could triangulate on the proof and find out what was true. But one of the first areas that the progressives infiltrated was journalism, because they knew that if they could control the information, they could control the way you think, and if they control the way you think, they control the way you vote. And so journalists now have been taught something that is antithetical to what the traditional idea of journalism is. The perfect textbook definition of journalism is that we comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. That's exactly precisely what a free press is supposed to do. They're supposed to go after the people that are in power, the people in authority, the politicians, the businessmen. They're supposed to be following them around and watching what they do and checking everything with a magnifying glass and rooting out corruption. In a healthy society, the free press are the white blood cells that destroy pathogens. They just looking everywhere. And anytime they see corruption, they go after it, they shine a spotlight on it, and it disappears because you can't run these things in broad daylight. But somewhere in the 60s, and it bears mentioning that the Frankfurt School, which is the home of this modern sort of social, kind of a social form of collectivism, and the idea of appealing to the dispossessed and all the rest of that stuff we'll get into on another show, was located at Columbia University, just a couple yards from where the Pulitzer Prize for Journalism is issued or won. So journalists today are not press. I don't know what else to call them, but I do know this. Having watched this get worse and worse and worse, 2020 was beyond anything I thought they would dare to do. I remember saying at the time that the Hunter Biden laptop story was crossing the Rubicon for them. It was an event from which they cannot recover. And now we find out that now that Joe Biden has presumably been safely elected, as far as the press has been is concerned, then we can now start to talk about the Hunter Biden laptop thing, since it's not going to have any consequences on getting the guy who's trying to make government smaller and who's laughing at us out of office, because that guy has to go. So they are not journalists. CNN is not a news organization, neither is ABC or any of them. There are a few exceptions. They are in the news suppression business. That's what journalists do now. They smother stories. They make sure that stories don't get out. New York Post is still a newspaper because the New York Post ran the story. New York Times immediately said, nah, there's nothing to it. It's probably a Russian hoax. That is not just not being a newsman. That's being an anti-newsman. You are the anti-press when you do that. The Times and everybody else. And CNN and all the rest. All of them. When CNN hands debate questions to Hillary Clinton on a CNN debate, that's not only not being a free press, that is being an anti-press. You are doing precisely the opposite of what you're supposed to do. Instead of rooting out corruption wherever you find it, you are only rooting out corruption that you disagree with, which means that the people who are counting on you for cover, the high-level politicians, know that the press is going to cover for them. And Andrew Klavan said it's the ring. In the Lord of the Rings. It's the ring of power, the ability of the press to cover, not cover in a good way, I mean smother is what I meant to say, smother stories, provides politicians with the ring of invisibility. It allows them to do whatever they want to because they know that they're invisible. Hillary Clinton can do these things with her laptop, and Hunter Biden can sell influence and complain about the big guy taking half and all the rest of it. And they do it because they know that even if they get caught, they're not going to get caught. Even if they get caught, this mechanism that should have been rooting out their corruption is going to aid and abet it and magnify it. It's going to smother the news stories. It's going to squash them. That's what it does. And you may wonder exactly how that happens. But when I was talking about my friend who, these Democratic voters who you really can't blame for this, if a story of magnitude comes out and you're not digging into the story and you're told by the New York Times, no, this is a Russian hoax. It's part of the same thing that this threat to democracy has created. And ABC News TV and CBS and CNN and NBC and all of the rest of them say the exact same thing. They're providing the social proof that this isn't a story. So it's not just a question of not covering the news. When they specifically do not cover a story that they know to be true, they are sending a signal to the entire population that this isn't anything to worry about. Don't worry. And a rational, normal American citizen would say, isn't this kind of scary? And you hear the Times and the Post and everything else. No, it's not real. If you've grown up trusting them as a news source, how are you going to know any different? But they are now, I think, I want to say they're the number. I don't know if they're the most dangerous threat to America, but they are certainly the ones that I hate the most. And that's the word I use. I hate them. I hate them. All of these people have violated the oaths of their office, whether they were taken as legal oaths or whether they were taken as part of the professional fraternity that they joined. When the Times ran an article, a relatively pro-conservative article, whose name was on my lips just a few moments ago, but it's gone. I'm not going to waste time on it. But there was an internal war in the New York Times between those older reporters who believed that even though they didn't agree with it, free speech is free speech, versus this entire young generation of so-called journalists, people coming out of journalism school anyway, who are saying no, they actually have a philosophy, and it's called safetyism. This is what a young reporter at the time said. It's a battle between the old and the young. The young believe, the older ones still have some shred of belief in free speech. The young ones believe in safetyism. And safetyism is the idea that no one should have to hear anything that they find offensive or hurtful. It's exactly what you'd expect from a bunch of coddled babies. But if you want to think about that, nothing that could be offensive or hurtful, what they really mean is they don't think that anything should go out there that should be offensive or hurtful to them. Everything they say is offensive and hurtful to me. Every word that comes out of their lying mouths is offensive and hurtful to me, including the idea of safetyism. The idea that a member of a profession that is tasked to provide information is going to decide what you hear or not hear based on whether or not it makes them uncomfortable is repugnant to me. So it's not about people feeling safe. Even if it were, it still wouldn't be any reason to do it. But call it what it is. It's bullying because people now are responsible for turning up news stories. These now are the people who are most afraid of news. They're the ones who are most traumatized by hearing something that they don't agree with. And as we talked about on one of these previous firewalls, George Stephanopoulos is asking the governor of South Dakota to provide evidence of voter fraud. It's not her job, Stephanopoulos. It's your job. You're the ostensive newsman. You're the one who should be going out there looking for evidence. So these people have done incredible damage, unbelievable damage. I'm tempted to split this up into two parts, but I don't think I will. I'll just speed up a little bit because I don't want to go any longer than I have to. We can come back and visit them all individually. Fourth on my list is academics, and I'm going to include the so-called scientific experts in this one. Journalists have a vision of themselves as crusaders in white hats. Used to be that they thought of themselves as kind of these, these kind of spunky gumshoes who had the gumption to follow this story down and track it down, and that was a healthy attitude. But now they feel that journalists feel that now their job is to move society into the direction of the higher truth, which has nothing to do with the actual truth, and that's their conceit. The conceit of the academic is that because they have extreme deep information and know virtually everything there is to know about one specific thing, because they're an expert in one field, they think that they become an expert in every field. And because they are so aware of their intellectual achievements in chemistry or whatever, they think that since I know so much about chemistry, I'm obviously smarter than the rest of these idiots out there, so therefore I know more about how you should run a gas station than the guy who runs the gas station, because I have a PhD and I teach at Harvard. And this is their conceit. And the emotional driver for academics, the thing that causes them to be so tempted to do these anti-American, anti-freedom activities, like brainwashing 3 generations of kids now, is twofold. It's the vanity of knowing that I'm an expert on this, and I'm an expert, and therefore I must know more about anything. And I love the adulation of my students when I tell them things like, you came here to Harvard, and I'm sure you thought that your family was loving and kind, and they spent the money to send you here. But I'm here to tell you that your family is a bunch of Nazis and murderers. And what do you think about that? And when you hit people at the age when psychologically they're wired to separate themselves, to leave the nest, it goes right in there. So why would somebody do something that repulsive and so repugnant? Well, the vanity and the adulation is a lot of it. But the other thing about it is the sheer plain raw rage that academics have that comes from envy. And this works something like this. Here I am in my tweed jacket, and I can tell you everything about the Italian Renaissance, the poetry, the art. I'm an acknowledged master in my field. And this is such a high level of knowledge, such important things, eternal things. I know the great Renaissance painters, and I can identify them at sight, and I know where the marble from the statue of David came from. Blah, 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 blah. And I am making $30,000 a year while that ignorant son of a bitch, that fat cigar-smoking, lazy, nasty bastard who doesn't even know how to spell the state that he lives in, is making $50 million a year selling cars, and that's wrong. And that's how they work. That's their mindset, all of it. That's their mindset completely. It is just plain raw envy. Academic is a politician who doesn't have the guts to leave the university and go out and take the things that he thinks he's entitled to. And I've seen this many, many times. That's why that old adage, those who can do and those that can't teach, has such truth to it. Because what you find, when, again, the stereotype is generally accurate. What you find with academics is you find people that are afraid of the real world, that they find comfort in the university. And as a guy who went back to a university, although not as a student, that line from Animal House, 7 years of college down the drain. There's a lot to be admired about living in a world that is not only free from the pressures of the outside world. If you're a student, you don't have to worry about a job. You get financial aid or a loan or whatever. Yeah, take whatever money you want. Well, we're not even going to make you pay it back. But you also get to live in a very rarefied world where everybody's very educated, and at least in the areas that you're familiar with and the areas that you're interested in. So if you have an interest in Renaissance poetry and you go to college and you meet some guy who knows all about the things that you're interested in, and then he also tells you that Orange Man is a Nazi, and anybody who's smart enough to understand the nuance of the mix of colors on this particular masterpiece by Leonardo is certainly smart enough to know that Orange Man is a fascist, and all of the people that follow him are ignorant Nazis who couldn't tell a Titian from a Botticelli. I just made those two names up. I didn't, but I don't know whether those are accurate. analogy, but you get the idea. And so there they sit in their little staff rooms, and they make very little money, and that's why they worship tenure. But really, they're driven by a powerful envy of the fact that other people out there who they consider to be much stupider than them are doing so much better than they are, and they have so much more. Because academics and teachers, generally speaking, are not very well paid individuals, and they have a burning resentment about that. And that is why they are ready to bring down capitalism. They hate capitalism. Academics hate capitalism because capitalism allows an idiot, a crass, vulgar idiot, to make $50 million a year selling cars, while they, with all of their sophistication and their knowledge and their genteel manners and their mastery of 7 languages and all the rest of it, are cranking out at $35,000, $40,000 a year. That's not right. That's unfair. So academics are in favor of taking money from the guy who's actually providing service to other people, because other people need cars, and he's providing automobiles at a reasonable price, and he is providing a service that the academic is not providing, because if the academic was providing anything of value equal to the guy who's got the car salesman, the car lot, then he'd be making $50 million too. This is intolerable for them. This is intolerable. It's psychologically absolutely intolerable, so they reject it. And so, needless to say, they're in favor of socialism and so on. I'm going to put all these in one show, so we may run a little long on this, but I'm trying to keep it moving here. Number 5 on the list of people who have anti-American values is celebrities. And celebrities, I mentioned, I think, on episode 0, the warm-up episode called Up From Despair. But basically, celebrities and actors, and when I say celebrities, I'm talking about performers generally, musicians, comedians, actors, writers, directors, the whole crowd. In order to understand them, you have to understand that these are people who have an enormous hole in the middle of them that they try to fill with either drugs or sex or gambling or whatever. But they find that the only thing that's really sustainable for their lack of self-love and self-respect is the ever-present adulation of other people. They are applause junkies, and they have to be not just admired, they have to be adored. They have to have it. That's what motivates them. That is their prime motivation in life, performers. I've got some of this in me too. And so when you deal with people like celebrities, you deal with people who have excelled at pretending to be somebody else. And this is not lost on them. It's not lost on Meryl Streep that the characters that Meryl Streep plays and that she wins these awards for are far more interesting people than Meryl Streep is. It's not lost on her at all. My mother had a chance to, she was at a party when she was very much younger, and my grandfather was in the Royal Navy, and she was in the Royal Navy as well as an auxiliary, I think. And she was at this party, young woman, and she saw this man sitting on the steps off in the corner by himself, very quiet and somewhat depressed looking. She went over and talked to him. And she talked to him for about an hour and found he was really quite a sad guy, kind of a quiet guy, shy, but not terribly interesting. And it was only after the party was over and this guy left that the people came rushing over to her and asked her, how the living daylights did you get to spend an hour talking to Peter Sellers on your own? She's, who's that? There was nothing there. And he's an extreme example, but there's nothing there. And that's why he's so good at filling himself up with another character. And so the weakness of celebrities is they have to be adored. Now, here's the thing about celebrities. If conservatism was a popular philosophy, if the news media, politicians, bureaucrats, and everybody else thought that conservatism was the way to go, then every single celebrity in Hollywood would be a conservative. They do what they do and raise money for socialism because they believe that's where most of the adoration is. If the country were to be completely Reaganized, and that everybody suddenly became rock rib conservatives, at least according to our traditional definition of it, in 3 years, everybody in Hollywood would be conservative, because they don't have principles, they don't have beliefs, they have a desire to be in the spotlight, and wherever that spotlight moves, that's where they're going to be. They don't have convictions. All they have is the mutual desire among all of them to be worshipped and adored by the people, but especially by other actors, you see, because part of being an actor, a celebrity anyway, is I want to be famous. I want to be recognized. I want this gaping hole where my self-respect should be, to be filled by people who come up to me constantly. Oh my God, I can't believe it's you, and can I have a picture with you? Yes, I suppose I have time to take a picture with you, and so on. And when you get really powerful, then you realize the real power is not doing the picture. That's the real power. When you get to be a real celebrity, it's not a question of, yes, I'll take a picture with you. It's the ability to say, I don't have time to stoop to that. But they are following the adulation and the spotlight. And as I said, if trendy people think that it's Marxism, and if the press and professors and academics and so on and government officials are going down the socialist road, then they become socialists. If everybody in college was being taught that conservatism was wonderful, and everybody that they saw as a potential audience member was starkly conservative, then they'd be making fun of liberals. They have to be approved of, and they have to be, and because they're so lacking in their own identity, because they're so good at becoming other characters, they also have a very, very, very powerful need to be seen as intellectuals and people of substance, that they need to be seen as people who are not just playing somebody else's role, but people with deep ideas. This is why, if you want to think about the typical classical entertainer in Hollywood today, the example, as I said, is it's somebody who spends 2.5 hours doing their makeup and then spends $400, $500, $700, $800, $900 worth of clothing to go to Starbucks and pretend like they just stepped out. Oh, I just decided to take some time away. And they bring with them a copy of War and Peace, and they sit there and they read War and Peace, and they're wearing glasses, and the glasses have no prescription in them. They don't need glasses to read. They just know that smart people wear glasses. It's a prop to them. And these people have enormous cultural sway. They used to anyway. And so those people are being swayed along to broadcast these anti-American ideas. 3 to go. Radical feminists, Black Lives Matter, social justice warriors, all of these people, their motivation is a furious anger. They are filled with rage, and most of that rage is directed at their missing parents. I have never yet had an experience. I've never yet seen an example where this failed. Whenever you talk to somebody who's a protester and just any of these, as I said, radical feminists, Black Lives Matter, social justice warriors, Occupy Wall Street, any of these perpetually outraged people who are constantly looking for outrage so that they can show you how angry they are and how superior they are morally, and this is how it should be done, and so on and so on and so on. The first question I always want to ask every single one of them, every time I see them, first thing I want to say to them is, tell me about your father. And I have seen people do it, and you get the exact response you think you would get. Tell me about your dad. What do you mean? Tell me about him. I'm glad to say he's not part of my life. Or whatever. You'll never, ever, ever run into one of those people and say, tell me about your father or your mother, or both. And say, I love my mom and my dad. They were everywhere for me, made sacrifices for me, taught me right from wrong. I've got nothing but love and respect for them. You'll never hear that from them, because if that had been true, if they had been raised in good families with a real father, real mother, they wouldn't be so damn angry. And if they weren't perpetually angry, they wouldn't have made being angry their job. That's what they do. We used to call them agitators. It's a much better word. That's what they do. And when you raise a generation of young people and tell them you cannot compete in anything, you can't be richer than anybody else, you can't be better looking than anybody else, you can't win in the baseball game or the soccer game because we're not going to keep score, there is no competition allowed whatsoever, you are all equally wonderful, equally brilliant little snowflakes that are all identical and all magnificent, then the only way that these people can compete for social status, and humans have social status built into them, hardwired into them, the only social status that these young people are allowed to achieve is who can be at the top of the outrage pyramid. And the advantage goes to the advantage goes to the the seeing impaired, trigender, Palestinian of color, or whatever you want. You've got this hierarchy of victimhood, and the higher you are on the hierarchy of victimhood pyramid, the more social status you have. Used to be that you admire somebody who made money or somebody who's a great sports hero. No, now it's a question of who could be the biggest victim. And so the people that are people of color or people of minorities have a natural advantage. But what you will find is you'll find young white kids doing their very best to catch up with them on the pyramid of social virtue by making it crystal clear that they are ready to atone for the horrible, horrible sins that they've committed by being white or straight or Christian or whatever. They are going to try and commit to competing with the rest of these victims by saying, yes, you have tremendous points for being a victim, but I have tremendous points for being a class traitor or a race traitor. I am so down with your struggle that I forsake my entire identity. That ought to get me some points, right? That's how they think. They're angry, and they want to destroy everything. They want to destroy capitalism because capitalism is here. If there's something else, they'd want to destroy that too. They want to get back at dad, or they want to get back at mom, and it's pretty clear that that's what drives these people, and that is where they are coming from. That's why they're so intent on destroying things. It's also why they're so intent on finding injustice. If there's no injustice, if there's no systematic injustice, if systematic racism, the ability to say you cannot join this club because of your skin color, if those things don't exist in America anymore, then what are they? They're just a bunch of whiny children. But if they can convince themselves that racism is everywhere and that their parents and everybody else are just Nazis and they're just that far away from taking my black friend out and into a woods and stringing him up to a tree, if they can convince themselves of that, then they're not just little whiny crybabies anymore. Now they're freedom fighters. Now they're warriors. Interesting, isn't it, that social justice warriors, people who are most opposed to warfare, nevertheless feel the need to grab that term and the prestige it brings to them. I'm a warrior. Are you? Yes, I'm a warrior for social justice. Okay? You sound kind of like a whining crybaby to me. The last enemy of freedom that I have on my list are the Karens. For those of you not familiar with the term, Karen is a person, male or female, but often a soccer mom type, who is determined to make it clear that they will not be tread upon. And this is the person who calls for the manager in a loud enough voice for the entire restaurant to hear, because she is outraged. Outraged, I say. The Gilligan's Island is running on the television at the end of the bar, when everybody knows that all-white cast is promoting the patriarchy and racism, and she is outraged and demands that channel be changed right now. She absolutely insists on it, and if Gilligan's Island is not turned off of that television within the next 5 minutes, she is going to write an extremely, extremely harshly worded letter to the local newspaper and make sure that you never, ever do business in this town again and that your life is ruined because you have offended her sensibilities. And that's what those people are. Easily offended, but mostly looking for revenge. They're also filled with anger and hate, and they feel a sense of powerlessness, and so they are determined to show everybody that this is how I want things, and I am going to get things done my way until I get things done my way, because my way is the only way, and anybody who disagrees with me is obviously wrong, and therefore I'm going to make whatever fuss I need to make, or write whatever letters I need, or whatever Facebook posts, or whatever I have to do in order to destroy somebody who has offended my sensibility, my tender, delicate sensibility. Those people must be punished or destroyed, and that's people who are perennially offended. It's the Karens are the ones that demand that a small town take down its Christmas display. It's been in the public square since the town's been there. It's been almost 200 years there's been some kind of Christmas display in that town. Well, I'm not a Christian, and every time I drive past it, it offends me. I find it offensive that somebody should have a scene of a baby in a manger out there, and since it offends me, then I want it gone, and I will do whatever it takes to get it gone. And then the cowards who are the politicians who have to stay in office, and the bureaucrats, all of them, they all get together, and they go, well, you're absolutely right. Yeah, we need to tear that down. If one person doesn't like something, then we have to get rid of it, even though everybody else loves it or is at least indifferent to it. That doesn't matter. As long as one person is offended by it, then we have to take it down to destroy it. And that's how they run the world. So to wrap up, I'll just say this. You'll notice I didn't say socialists on this list. And the reason I didn't say socialists is because socialism is not a class of enemy. Socialism and things like that, racial justice, social justice, I believe in individual justice, don't get me wrong. But I didn't put socialists on the list because on some level, they're all socialists because socialism is not something that any of them believe in. Socialism is just their choice of weapon to get what they want. AOC is a politician who uses socialism to become famous and influential. Bureaucrats like it because it means a big bureaucracy, big state. Journalists like it because they think it's on their side of bringing justice to an unjust society. Academics like it because it's going to take money away from the car dealer and give it to me where it belongs. Celebrities like socialism because it allows them to show the common people that they're down with their struggles as they fly over them in their helicopters. I'm with you on this, I'm with you on this, fight the power. And the angry people love it because it gives them a fig leaf for smashing windows. We're doing this for social justice. And that's why we're stealing this TV set. And the Karens love it because they like telling people what to do. So I will close you with this. I've saved the number one enemy of American freedom for last. And the greatest enemy to freedom and all the values of Americanism is me. I'm the greatest enemy. I am the greatest enemy of freedom because freedom is dependent on me to be a watchdog and to be active and to care enough to do something about it. And I didn't. Whatever I might have done was not enough. And all of these people who I've known about and who you've known about too have gotten away with what they've gotten away with because of me. Because I didn't have the energy or the guts or the motivation or whatever to stop them. I didn't want to get involved in local politics because I thought it was boring and demeaning, and it is. But I just decided, somebody else will take care of that. That resignation, that sense of somebody else will do it. That's the greatest enemy of freedom right there. That's the one that has got us into this trouble. You can't blame snakes and scorpions for being snakes and scorpions. The only people that can assume any responsibility for a snake or a scorpion coming into your nursery and biting your infant child and having that child die is you. You can't blame the child because the child can't do anything about it and is unaware of the snakes and scorpions. And you can't blame the snakes and the scorpions because that's what snakes and scorpions do. That's what they're built for. And you know it. And so the only responsible person in a situation like that kind of tragedy, is you. And when snakes and scorpions take away the government of a country predicated on all of these magnificent ideas, the only person who you can possibly blame for this is me. Me. That's the number one enemy of freedom right now. What are we going to do about that? See you tomorrow.